So hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We're super excited to have you all with us. I'm Nick Calhoun. I am the Director of Programming for Amplify Unity, Director of Programming and Operations, excuse me. We're all very happy and appreciative that you could join us, our panelists, facilitators, and our participants in making today possible. Just a few words about Amplify Unity. We're a collective dedicated to uplifting the voice of peace in Israel and Palestine. This voice of peace is rooted with individuals like all of you on this call. One of Amplify Unity's main goals is to provide peace workers seeking justice a platform to educate and engage with the public through events much like the one today. Amplify Unity was founded by 4 alumni from Tel Aviv University International's Conflict Resolution and Mediation Program, with our sight set on unifying all levels of peace work. So I'd like to introduce you all to my teammates. We have Peter Pesov, Director of Policy and Research. Sorry, my computer is giving me a message, my bad. We have Chelsea Wasserman, Director of Partnership and Business Development.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Freiki Sadoun, Director of PR and Communications. So a little bit about our panel today. It's going to focus mainly on the topic of conflicting narratives, misinformation, xenophobia, and the roles that they play within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first half of the panel will be a discussion between the panelists on the topic. The Amplify Unity team has develop specific questions to guide this process. And after this panel discussion, our participants will be broken out into breakout rooms with trained facilitators and using the information learned and any previous knowledge you may have.
Oh, so you want me to cancel what I'm doing?
You will be coming up with 5 to 4 policy recommendations as it relates to our topic. Now here, I really want to stress creativity and passion more than academic theory and expertise while you're in these breakout rooms. Our goal for the event is that our panelists have a chance to share the work and their ideas with all of you, and the participants take away new insights and perspectives related to peace work and create collaborative ideas to help solve some of the challenges. It will be best if you're all in gallery view for today's panel discussion as well, so you can see everyone. Sometimes Zoom does give you the option to pin multiple people to your screen, so check that out if you'd like to. Once we get those solutions from the breakout rooms, Amplify Unity plans to take them, compare and contrast them, and write policy papers that will be sent to government officials, NGOs, and organizations with the aim to change behavior and policy of political state actors. In addition to your insights and creativity, we'll be using the developed we'll be using those points also to help us develop future talks. So for now, we do ask that participants remain muted during the panelist discussion and when not speaking during the breakout rooms. So we do have some ground rules for today's session. First and foremost, we ask that all listen to understand first. Ask questions before judgment and use respectful language at all times. In addition, when in breakout rooms, please limit your responses to 30 seconds and do your best to participate in an egalitarian manner. These ground rules we put in the chat and reviewed just before breakout rooms begin. Panelists, you will each have 3 minutes to give an introduction of yourself and the work and any additions related to the topic. After we finish that rotation, we'll begin our rotation of specific questions, and you each have 3 that we've prepared. You will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond to each question. If you wish to add on or ask another panelist a follow-up question, you may raise your hand and you'll have 30 seconds to respond. So now I'd like to take a second before we begin the Q&A and introduce our panelists. So we have Alon-Lee Green, the National Director of Standing Together. We have Elliot Talbert Goldstein, expert on social media from University of Maryland. We have Huda Abuarquob, Regional Director for Allmep in the West Bank. And we have Wassim Almasri, Regional Director from Allmep in the West Bank, or Alliance for Middle East Peace. Did we have our last two panelists join also, or I wasn't able to see this?
Just a correction. Huda is the only regional director of Allmep. I'm the regional program director.
Regional program director. Thank you, Wassim, for that correction. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Arik, Segel, the director of Conntix, will be joining us momentarily.
Yes, and so we've also planned to have Sally Abed, the resource development director from Standing Together today as well. And hopefully will be joining us in just a bit. So with all of that being said, we'll go ahead and get started with our first round of questions. And the first question that we've prepared today is for Elliot. We'd like you to start us off. Do you feel misinformation around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict plays a role in reinforcing divisiveness and xenophobia through social media?
I think you could say that about any conflict. I think what's interesting about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and social media is how widespread it is, meaning outside the region. You know, you have other areas where Facebook has played a role, but you don't have audiences across the world that are getting interested in sharing and posting about the things that are happening in those smaller areas. But the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you have campuses in the United States, campuses in the UK, North America, Europe, Asia, everywhere. People will share this information. The scale and scope, cut me off whenever my time is up too. The scale and scope of misinformation that gets spread it's pretty amazing, and it pushes extremists on both sides. You know, the people that want to cause more conflict are able to take advantage of the same marketing tactics that anybody uses on social media, including you know, your team. You guys posted on Instagram, you got people to come, you have hopefully people that weren't familiar with your work, but it spread the word, and then they came to this event. That's the same thing that misinformation is able to do with any conflict, and with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular, because it's so emotional, because it's connected to religion, because people feel so connected to it over the last 100 years. It's only been able to grow and scale with social media.
Absolutely. And Elliot, I apologize for this. I think I may have gotten ahead of myself just a bit. Can you go ahead and give us an introduction of you and your work, and we'll also go through the rest of our panelists?
Sure. I'm Elliot Goldstein. I work at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I work in digital strategy. So I've worked in creating a lot of digital communications products over the years. A doctoral student studying information systems, and specifically cyber conflict and cooperation. And I graduated from the Tel Aviv University program in 2014. I think that's right.
Nice. Thank you. So I'm just going in order if I see you all on my screen. Huda, would you mind giving us a quick overview and introduction of your work as well? Or we can, Huda, we were asking if you can give a quick overview of your work and any background information related to the topic.
Sorry, guys, I didn't hear it for a minute. It disappeared. Okay, my name is Huda Abuarquob, and I'm the regional director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, and I work with Wassim in that alliance. We are 150 organizations that are working, trying to, within the field of peace building and trust building and relationship building. And we use all kinds of theories of change to move people from competing narratives of victimhood to more of action-oriented survivorhood mechanism. We also hope that at some point we will raise the capacity of our members also to start acting as a community rather than fragmented organizations. We need to address issues that has to do with youth, both in Palestine and in Israel, and the way they feel about each other, they feel about their own people, and how they see the horizon or not in this case. So fear, trauma, and hate are very, very important issues for us to tackle. And we do that through different kinds of actions. Today we have Alon and hopefully Sally will join him, and they are both from Standing Together, an action-oriented organization that has done an amazing work in the past, especially after the last aggression on Gaza. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And Wassim, you are the next on my screen, so I'll go ahead and ask you to give a quick overview.
Sure. My name is Wassim Almasri. I am a third-generation refugee born in Lebanon, raised in a refugee camp in Syria. I grew up in Gaza for the majority of my life. I studied information technology as well in Chicago. I did not finish, but I came back. I worked with the Red Cross in Gaza for 5 years. I was documenting cases with the Red Cross. I moved to the West Bank in 2010. I worked in the last 11 years in people-to-people programming. I was the communication director for One Voice Movement. Also have a great on-campuses program across universities in the US. Also one of our members, and Zimam Foundation as one of the founders and co-director. And I still am on the board of Zimam Foundation. They're doing incredible work here in the West Bank. I joined Allmep 3 years ago as a program director, and it's been crazy ever since. That's it.
Nice, thank you for that. Alon, we'll take some time now for you to go ahead and give an introduction as well.
Hi, thanks. So my name is Alon-Lee. I'm from Tel Aviv, Israel. I'm the national co-director of Standing Together, Nakif Ma'an, Omdim Beyachad, which is an Israeli grassroots Jewish Arab movement. We organize Arab Palestinian and Jewish citizens of Israel in the struggle for peace and equality and social justice. We do so because we understand that there is an interconnection between those struggles, and we understand that only by organizing people and mobilizing them, we can create the power on the ground to try and change the reality we're facing. We did a lot of mass mobilization around the last war in Gaza, as Huda said, and I would be happy to talk about it a bit later. Thanks.
Of course, thank you, thank you. And Arik, we'll go ahead and have an introduction with you as well.
Hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just away from home, assisting with the new COVID testing we're having. My name is Arik Segel. I'm a mediator by training, an educator. I work through the company I established called Conntix, connecting people through innovation and technology. My focus is to use technology and innovation in peace building and conflict resolution. I do it either in practical projects or in teaching. Most of my projects deal with either track 2, track 3 diplomacy, not just Israel-Palestine, also Israel-Turkey and Gulf region. And in terms of teaching, I teach this year Herzliya. I teach at Bar-Ilan University, courses about innovative conflict resolution, innovative diplomacy, and more interesting project I'll tell you about later.
Lovely. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just running through, checking to see if we've gotten Sally. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and move on through it. So Alon, going back to our first question, which was focused around misinformation and the role it plays within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We'd like to ask you, Alon, what role do you feel misinformation plays within the younger Israeli generation when it comes to voting in the last round of elections?
Wow, voting. So I think it's a good question because there is like complete two different worlds when it comes to voting in general in Israel, which is the world of our Palestinian citizens of Israel and the world of the Jewish citizens of Israel. That you kind of generally have around the role of the Arab parliament members in Israel. You see that there is this very big story that is being told about them, that, you know, Arab parliament members care only about Gaza, or they care only about Palestinians in the West Bank, but they never do the work for us, the community of our Palestinian citizens inside Israel. So why should you vote for them? And that's a story that is being kind of widely told. And when young people from the Arab community in Israel, when they come to ask themselves, why should I vote? Why is it even interesting for me? This is the first answer they get. And when you see the percentage of voting among this community, among the young people in the Arab Palestinian community in Israel, it's just shocking. People are just choosing not to go and vote, choosing not to care. And I think this misinformation about the role of the parliament members and the Arab parties in parliament is just a big part of it. The truth is that those parliament members are very much committed to the causes, to the livelihood, and to the questions of security, physical security in the streets of our Arab towns in Israel, for equality, for women's wages, and public transportation and stuff like this. And when you portray those parties and parliament members only as people that care about someone that is not you, people just lose their ambition to go and participate. And I think this is something that is being directed from the right wing in Israel, from the government, to try and put the Arab vote really back ahead from the Jewish vote.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And Arik, as it relates to kind of like the motivation behind these things, we're curious to know, what do you feel the consequences are of the divisive media narratives on Israel and Palestine are, and what is some of the work that you're doing that helps, like, or that potentially can lead to some of that being resolved?
Well, first, I think we need to distinguish between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is only part of the picture. It's information which is not created to harm people, but disinformation is created to harm people. And I think in this context, there's a lot of disinformation that creates a lot of harms and is directly related to physical violence. I mean, there is a movement. What I believe in is the real impact is when we move from digital world to the physical world, and we see it clearly with disinformation, sometimes with disinformation being spread around issues and conflict. Now, I've been working on this topic for the past year and a half, not necessarily in the context of Israel-Palestine, but in generally. I mean, in my work, I see conflicts and technology, and for me, disinformation, misinformation are conflicts that live mostly on the virtual digital dimension. So I was thinking, okay, what can I do for my toolbox? And most of you guys are conflict resolution students, so this is what I was thinking. What kind of tools can we take from conflict resolution theory and practice and actually manage disinformation and misinformation? And I actually found many tools very effective. There are many tools and methods, and most people think that we just need to press a button. Let's invent this app, and that's it. There's no more misinformation, no more disinformation. We can know clearly what is real and what is fake, but this is not true. We all know that people believe what they want to believe. We know there's a lot of gray area in between truth and lies. So the best tool I found that relates to conflict resolution is education. And in the past year, I've implemented about 5 different, I would say, projects or ways to fight that. And I'll just briefly tell you, I started with a digital campaign a year ago, generally to fight the disinformation around COVID. It was done in 4 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, Russian, English, 3 different kinds of ads. And the ads contained those questions we use in conflict resolution, in which we ask ourselves, do you actually, what could be the interest behind those people who wrote the ad? Who wrote the ad? What is the hidden agenda? And this is what we want people to educate them. Try to think, what is behind that? Because in negotiation, we only see the outcome, but we negotiate or mediate on the root causes. So I did this digital campaign about a year ago. Then I did a course for community leaders, and here is another important aspect: the actors. Digital community leaders, people who lead communities of 10,000, 20,000, maybe 100,000 people in Israel, in Palestine. And I did a course in the cooperation with the US Embassy, and I was teaching them what I know, and they could deliver that knowledge forward through the community leaders. And I'm working on a very, very cool idea now of a game. It should be out in the next month. A game which will teach kids how to find truth, or what kind of tools we use. For example, from technical stuff, but also trying to think of, okay, what is the agenda? What are the interests? Who wrote it? Why? Does it relate to certain events that are happening right now? So this game should be out in the next month, and should be also a very interesting initiative. And other than that, I give lectures and workshops to different organizations, and of course, in the courses that I teach. And I mean, from what I know, from what I read, from people I work with, the best weapon we have right now to fight the phenomena are education, to educate people to think about what they read online, how to read it. And of course, there are other methods in which we can put pressure on big tech companies, but we can maybe talk about that later.
Yeah, thank you, Arik. Absolutely. I mean, I think what was really cool there too is like how you're explaining the two differences between misinformation and disinformation, and versus like misinformation harming. And so Wassim, I want to come to you and ask more of a personal question. What do you feel, where are we going? From personal experience, what role does misinformation play in the Gaza Strip? And how does it relate to the perpetuation of xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and the conflict at large?
I think it's an important question, but given the work that I've seen as of recently in the cross-border and shared society, although religion, I believe, plays a huge part, or at least some sort of a part in this conflict. But I don't believe that the fears that were created over these years are because the core issue of it is religion. I personally believe that is related to the lack of narrative on an understanding of the other side. And I think in many cases, a lot of the organizations that we work with, we see today standing together, for example, work on providing an alternative narrative, which I think is super important about the other side. And I think in many cases, that lack of narrative is the main reason why people find it incredibly difficult to accept the other side, or to believe that their right to exist here is righteous in a way. As for Gaza, as an example, I genuinely, and I get this question a lot about where Gaza stands from this conflict, and I only could say is that the story does not start usually, because the misinformation that I see on mass media, usually the story starts with hundreds of rockets fired from Gaza into Israel, but there's usually not a mention of what happens before that. How did we get to that point? And if you look at the situation in Gaza, if you understand the reality of the people who live there, and just to give you a little bit of background, because I lived through the 2008 war in Gaza, and understand the infrastructure is completely broken, where probably water will kill people over the last 3 years. More than anything else, as far as I remember, 35% in the water of Gaza is contaminated, and it's more likely to create the majority of diseases that people have been dealing with. In a nation, this is a small place where like 2 million people, half of that population is kids, is children. They're aged between 3 years and possibly, I believe, 12. If you take in the sole hope and commitment to live a decent life, and you box them, and then they're surrounded in this siege and this blockade for 15 years, it's very evident that will create hate. It's not a systematic system that has been put in place to generate anti-Semitism or to generate hatred toward the other side. It's the actions and the reality that provide a very ripe environment for extremism. And I believe this is what we should be looking at, the conditions and the circumstances that led to that point.
Yeah, certainly. I think like adding that perspective to what you're saying, like these narratives, is really important. And that was one of the reasons Amplify Unity kind of founded itself on, was like, we've got to figure out a way to uplift like multiple perspectives happening in this conflict, because people are not hearing all of the information that's coming from all of the sides. So how do we like centralize it in some way? And Huda, I'm just curious to know, do you feel your own daily life as a Palestinian in the West Bank is correctly reflected in the media, both locally and globally?
The simple answer is no. And that's why sometimes I think there's an opportunity with social media. We need to find alternatives to know. And one of the things that COVID-19 also took away from us as a community is the fact that people are not here physically to experience what it means to be living in the West Bank. Just yesterday, I had 3 friends from Europe who came to visit, and they asked to go to the old city of Hebron. And I personally, I hate to go there. And it was Shabbat, and I went there, and I engaged with one of the settlers who was there arguing with me about not believing in God. I do believe in God, but for him, it was an issue that I am not believing in God. And when he asked me where you are from, I said, I'm from here, I'm from Hebron. He was like, welcome back. Knowing he knows that I'm Palestinian. So I can see how these narratives of us versus them are entrenched in the systems here. There are a propaganda machine that is funded with billions of dollars in order to keep people thinking that they are 2 different entities fighting over the same piece of land, and one has more right because God gave it a deed. And I think the religious narrative has a huge impact, especially in the scene in Hebron. But when you mention the word apartheid, for instance, and people come back against you and they say, you know, that this is not true, this is not apartheid, I take them to Hebron. I don't believe it's apartheid. I think the South African apartheid is completely different from what we are experiencing in Hebron. But I take them to Hebron, and the minute they see the reality there, things change. And I have to say, most of the people who come and visit and I go with them are Jewish, living in the diaspora. And to them, the story of anti-Semitism is very important for them. And as a Palestinian, one of the things that I don't want to be connected to our just cause is the fact that the Palestinian cause is impacting more anti-Semitic feelings in the world. This is not gonna happen. We will not allow it. The Palestinians should not allow what is happening to them to happen to another entity, because there are groups and organizations that want to use the just Palestinian cause in order to promote hate. Sorry, we will not allow it. And this is one of the things that I think peace building can contribute to. When there is an Israeli and Palestinian standing in the middle of Europe, telling people that you taking advantage of this conflict in order to make another group, marginalized group, or a small, a fragile group suffer, this goes against everything that we believe in as Palestinians and Israelis. And then we move from the competing narratives of victimhood to a collective narrative of survivorhood and cooperation rather than competition. There is a piece of land here that is we are all losing, and there is also a piece of our humanity that we are losing. It's literally now very difficult to defend an Israeli in front of anyone, including the Palestinians who experience Israelis on daily life, on daily basis. So my struggle as a person who lives in the West Bank is to keep a sense of humanity when I think of the other. And this is what I want to do with children here in Palestine and in Gaza and in the world, so as not to grow inheriting these us versus them narratives.
Absolutely. And certainly when you're like on the internet inundated with that us versus them narrative, it's so hard to hang on to that humanist aspect. And related to some of the things that Huda was saying, Alon, we're curious to know do you feel that there's misinformation, about Palestinian realities, Islamophobic tropes, or xenophobia in Israeli media? And we were hoping you could speak to a little bit about what Standing Together is doing to help combat against that xenophobia and misinformation.
Well, there's a very short answer for your question, and it's of course that yes. I think that in many different cases we can just witness how our media, our mainstream media, is just telling us a story of all Palestinian being part of terrorist groups, of Palestinians not just being people that are living in Hebron or in Ramallah or in Gaza or in Nablus, and this humanification of Palestinians is something that we see so much, and it's something that prevents us as a society from asking questions of why is it reasonable to have just another round of violent escalation? Why is it reasonable to prevent of entering, constructing materials into Gaza, or a coriander, parsley is not allowed to go into Gaza? And I think the reason, or the very tough question of why aren't we as a society asking those questions of why is rooted in this misinformation and public image that is just not correct. I think that it's very hard in Israel to find images of normality, of normal life just happening around us. One thing about it is that there isn't a very normal life under military occupation. Most of the Palestinians live under a direct military occupation. Others are living in under siege. Israel controls almost every aspect of life of Palestinians. And it's very hard to find those glimpses of normal life and these places where we can identify. We can identify as people where we can see, look at the beach of Gaza. Just 2 days after the ceasefire of the last violent escalation, you could see masses of like a lot of people going in Gaza to the beaches. That showed, the very simple desire of just life, of just going to the beach, enjoying the sun, enjoying the water, just days after being bombed. Those pictures weren't really spread widely in the Israeli society, and I think what we're trying to do in Standing Together in our grassroots movement is not fighting the media or trying to bring a different aspect or angle about this. This is something that needs to be done, but it is not our role. But what we're trying to say is that we as Israelis, Arab Palestinian Israelis, Jewish Israelis, we have the right and the need to have this normal life, quiet life, peaceful life, and that in order to have that, we need to understand that people in both sides of the border of the green line are losing from the occupation, or losing from these endless cycles of wars and aggressions. And what we're trying to do is to kind of create a voice of a majority. Not of extremists saying that it's us or them, not of people saying we've been here first, but of people saying that this land can inhabit all of us, this land can bring and share the fruits of it among all of us. And creating this voice is something that is normalizing the lives and the society of also Palestinians. I hope also that and this is something important to say, that also outside of Israel, what we're doing is creating the picture that is too many times not being told outside of Israel, that we are, as any other society, a society. The Israeli people, whether they're Jewish or Arab, we have our fears, we have our hopes, we have our disparities. We are not identified with our government in most cases, whether it's economical or insecurity issues. We lose from this reality as well. But outside of Israel, and I think probably a lot of times also in the Palestinian territories, we're being, just identified with the Israeli government and with the settlements, and merge into one big blur of racism. But that's not the case. We are trying to say, yes, the Israeli society is a society, and it has a fight for living, a just life, a fight of living in equality, and a fight of living in peace. And looking from outside, inside, from outside on Israel, we have to understand it. And that's something we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And Elliot, we're going to come to you in just a moment for question, but I do want to reiterate to our panelists that if you do want to add on or have follow-up questions to any other panelists, feel free to raise your hand and let us know, and we'll happily give you that space. So with that, on this topic, Elliot, I'm going to kind of change the question actually, but what personal thoughts do you have on the way social media platforms played a role in fueling hate crimes and ethno-religious violence in the international community and within shared society in Israel during the following and most recent escalation? And I'm curious to know if you can also give us a little bit information on what ways social media could potentially start to uplift this more collective, fuller narrative that Wassim, Huda, and Alon are explaining.
Yeah, I was just waiting for everybody to talk. It was just really great to hear what everybody's saying and thinking about it in the context of social media. I wanted to kind of keep adding, but everybody kept adding more and more. I just kept thinking about what to say. It is really so interesting and great to hear like what is going on with your groups inside in the region. And when you think about what's going on in social media, of course, the problems, the goods and the bads are amplified on social media within the region. But the other complicated thing is, again, how far it reaches outside. I was just on Alon's website, and there's an English page, and then the rest is in Hebrew and Arabic. And so much of the kind of problematic posts are coming from people who are outside of the conflict, that don't see the day-to-day life, that haven't been to Hebron, that aren't in Ashkelon, living with the rockets, living in Gaza, living with the occupation. People aren't seeing this stuff, and then they're sharing and they're retweeting and they're reposting. And I think it's really important to, like what Arik said that he's doing, is re-educating, basically using the same kind of what we talk about in marketing, what they talk in kind of the online radicalization, is the same tools that we use to help you buy and recruit and market are the same things that they're trying to use to radicalize and use disinformation to create harm. And programs that do use this, again, the same tools, but to create peace, are really what needs to be the focus. There are, and Arik touched on this briefly, there are tools that we can ask the large tech companies to do. They can stop allowing liking on problematic posts. They can, alert people to misinformation and disinformation. There are technological tools that can be done, standards and controls, regulations. There are things that can be done. But in addition to that, groups like these, like everybody on this call, like all the panelists, all the attendees, everybody here can do is to post and repost and share the groups that are trying to make peace. And one of the real problems is that people who aren't familiar with the region are sharing things in some cases that they think are promoting peace. And I have seen this firsthand. I had to have a discussion with colleagues about their posts that was like, it was how to promote Palestine without being anti-Semitic. And the first thing was like, well, Jews came to Palestine and occupied and took the land from everybody. And I was like, look, that's one person's narrative, but don't describe it as anti-Semitism, or don't describe it as not anti-Semitic. People who aren't familiar with the region are sharing this stuff, and that's the scale, that's the kind of the push that's on it. That's the momentum that all these things have. And I think it's really important that people who are in the region, the people who are experts, the people who are living there, the people who know, are focusing and can explain calmly that, there are people working together. There are people who are looking to make peace, that, like everybody so far has said, this is a region that we're all, I think it was Alon who said, we're losing everybody's losing out right now. Nobody gets the advantage of living here because of everything that's going on. And I think that if everyone is promoting this message, everyone that we can, everybody we can reach is promoting the message of we need to keep working on these things. And that's the stuff that works on social media. I think that's really important. I don't have anything about the most recent conflict. I mean, I heard stories from, about WhatsApp being used to radicalize groups, and that's really difficult. But the other thing that I think about is the whole Ben and Jerry's stuff that's going on right now, and everybody's up in arms about the ice cream, and it's like, well, what's the solution here? And sometimes you just have to oh my God, it's not about ice cream, there are so many other great practical solutions going on that we need to stop talking about Ben and Jerry's, some Vermonters who are causing trouble, owned by Unilever, the largest multinational corporation in the world, and focus on the groups that are doing the grassroots work. We need to promote the message of people that are actually discussing the stuff on the ground and are familiar with what's going on. And then when you look at the actual Ben and Jerry and what they're saying, like, oh, well, we've been working with this guy for decades. Like, we've been selling ice cream there for the 80s. We know this guy, he's been hiring Palestinian workers, whatever. When you actually stop reading the headlines and get down to the nitty gritty, you can actually start to see what's happening on the ground. And I think that it's just really important that, and even I find myself explaining to people, answering responses, and I try not to get involved too much on social media with what's going on. But even when people post a little bit of misinformation or disinformation, I just try and post, here's a link to that. I'm not agreeing, I'm not disagreeing. Here's a link to what you're describing. Or here's a link that kind of shows that what you're describing isn't exactly accurate from either side. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So on these solutions and like working against it, Arik, I want to come to you, and you've kind of already touched base on the first part of this question, but feel free to elaborate. What personal experiences do you have working with media and misinformation, and how does or should this change with like the tech industry's evolution? So essentially, like, what can the tech industry do, and then what are your personal experiences with seeing it?
So, if we're talking really practical solutions.
One second, we may be having trouble with your audio. It's quite faint. Let's see. Is it maybe, are you using a phone perhaps?
Can you hear me?
Very faintly. Maybe we can try and see what happens.
Okay, I'll talk loud. Is it better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, just the conditions here are not the best. So I'll be brief and concise. Look, what works in these efforts are coalitions of different individuals and different organizations that have different kinds of comparative advantage. And I mean NGOs, traditional media, white hat, which are hackers that could have the technical capacity, and of course, big organizations and tech companies. Now, it is difficult to create these coalitions. So what I would suggest for anyone that is interested to do is to try to think about it as a problem of a consumer, producer, and provider, and try to see which one of those can you play a more significant role. Now, about the tech industry and tech companies, honestly, it's almost a lost cause because those companies are more powerful than governments. Politicians are dependent on them. So this is why there is no legislation. This is why in the US there's a huge, they just issued another antitrust lawsuit against Facebook 2 days ago, but it's very difficult to enforce any kind of measures against them. Here, I mean, it can only be like a very big, strong organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, which managed to change Facebook's rules about hate speech. So that's one thing about big tech companies. But the tech industry in general, honestly, I don't think they care. They care about profit and money, and disinformation, misinformation, hate in general is more profitable than peace. This is a problem that, I mean, you guys solve and try to think. If you manage to make peace profitable, if people can make money out of it, then there will be lots of solutions. And finally, I think that if we're talking about producers, anyone can report or join an organization. There is a very good organization here called Fake Reporter, which are doing an amazing job. They focus on all different kinds of misinformation, disinformation. So you can just report when you Google them, then you can report any kind of misinformation, fake news stuff that you see. And finally, again, this is what I stressed before, is education. And if we're all coming from conflict resolution, we have the tools, we have the knowledge, just delivering it forward in different platforms. Why shouldn't every, I don't know, like 6th grade school in Israel and Palestine, everywhere, should have a class about digital literacy, understanding what you read online. And these are the kind of projects which anyone can just undertake, and then offer schools, or do it independently, or do it with NGOs, and just try to make people understand what they read and how to use the internet better. I think this will be the most effective.
Thank you for that. I was going to ask, can we get that organization typed in the chat as a resource for our participants and other panelists as well? Quickly, since I think we're doing quite okay on time, I just want to ask one follow-up question to the other panelists related to this idea of profitability of conflict over peace, and just see if there's any ideas or any possible solutions that you see how we could make the voice of peace a little bit more profitable, if you will, as it relates to this. I saw you come off mute, Huda, so I'll let you go if that was you signifying you have something.
Yeah, I think we need to redefine a few things here. One of them is power, and then security, and peace itself. And I agree with Arik that we need a strategy when it comes to social media, but I think we also need to work on the messaging itself. The work that we're doing is not necessarily viewed as a work that can change the status quo, yet we are always accused for not changing the status quo, as if we are the only acting entity in this conflict. And I find it sometimes very condescending coming from academia people. Sorry guys, this is not an attack against you. I am against otherization, but it's normally we are an easy target for them. We do all kinds of work in order to keep ourselves in check. We make sure that we are not using a language that shuts people down or make them feel insecure. We try to communicate with track 1 and track 2 people. We're, at the end of the day, we are people with less funding than any other entity that is trying to change the status quo using violence or using misinformation. And yet we have all kinds of criticism from all kinds of people, including our own, because we're not also doing that much. And I think the messaging is really important. And one of the things that I want to copy Wassim in is when he did his first program about storytelling, trying to amplify our members' work by giving them a platform where they can tell their story with pictures and their own voice, bringing their own emotions into it without blaming or shaming, just telling stories about daily lives in Palestine and Israel, people who are just ordinary people trying to, again, maintain a degree of humanity. He said something about there is no shame of being a peace builder, which is something that we in the field always feel that we should be proud of being peace builders. But what does that peace look like, and how can we actually make it a strategy rather than just a hug a tree kind of activity? It has to be something that we can wage. And I'm sorry to use a term that is used technically in wars, but it's about time for us to start waging peace. And waging peace means that we need to come up with strategies that, first of all, de-escalate the violence happening on the ground. And this is something that we can do. The more teaching and learning we can do about how that violence impacting the way we are viewing ourselves and the other is going to help. I think we need to create strategic partnerships with allies all over the world, like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement. Try and bring people like Abraham Joshua Heschel, the person who marched with Martin Luther King. Why he is not part of the conscious of the Jewish and Israeli youth? Why we are just looking for models or of models that only contribute to the us versus them. I think it's important for us to start tackling every narrative that makes us stand against each other as enemies. And we should name things. We should put a name on, like there is no, we should not be shying away from naming the occupation as an occupation until it sits in the minds of the Israelis to know that it's costing them. The occupation is actually costly, economically, morally speaking. They will not be able to move in order to change it. And then we will just be waiting for someone to throw a rocket or bomb a bus in order for the world to come together and try and find a solution. Why not finding that solution? Because there are needs that we need to speak to them. And I propose redefining power, peace, and security from a needs human theory rather than political theory.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. It's super great. I think some of the things I'm taking away are just this idea of, I love the idea of waging peace. I know you were worried about speaking in war language, but no, like it's exactly right. How does we move this forward? And you mentioned a program that Wassim was running. So I'm just curious to know, Wassim, if there's anything else you'd like to add. And then we also do have a question related to Western media, and how is the Western media misinforming the world on the situation in Gaza? And what are ways that us in the West or in the Western media can start to help change that process?
On the program first, it was founded roughly 2 years ago. Ideally, what we wanted to do is create a parallel track for narrative storytelling where Palestinians and Israeli will find a safe platform to share their personal stories, but at the same time build a community around peace building. Exactly for the reason that Huda mentioned, that this is working in this quote unquote sector is very terrifying for a lot of us, because not only because of the anti-normalization movement, but we also, because we work within communities that we don't usually feel incredibly safe at. And we need to create this safe environment where people feel like they could share these narratives and build stories and build connections around them. And I feel that, like Huda said, we shame away from saying the word peace a lot. And peace for us should be a basic human right. And I think I always say that our people deserve to live in peace. That's the basic human right, just like anything else, just like water, just like anything else. And I cannot imagine a world where we could live where we cannot think about the future and think about peace. And obviously that vision of peace will differentiate from one person to another. People will call it equality, people will call it justice, whatever you want to call it. I think at the end of the tunnel, there's a certain vision to it. You could check out the stories of the people at stories.allmep.org. There's multiple stories told in a very cool narrative way, with photos done by a lot of the people that we work with from the field. They're Palestinians and Israelis. And in addition to this, you could also check our brand new podcast that we're doing with the New Israel Fund, and is co-hosted with Sally Abed from Standing Together and Dina Kraft, and tells also the stories of Palestinians and Israeli activists across 3 cities that witnessed the events in May. So Jerusalem, I think Lod and Haifa. And these sort of stories is what's important, is an important part about the work that we're doing here. And also it's a differentiation between when you talk about polarization of communities here and polarization of communities and platforms outside. I don't feel that what's happening here is a polarization of communities. This is a culture built on years and years of conflict. While on the other outside, you see that most communities, for example, from my experience working in the UK and in the US, there's much, much more polarization to Palestinian-Israeli conflict than there is here. There's a lack of interest, and there's a sort of experience that Palestinians in the diaspora and Jewish communities also bring to that platform. And I could also recommend checking the work of organizations like Solution Nut Sites based in the UK. They provide excellent narrative Palestinians and Israelis. And One Voice movement, they're based in the US. They have One Voice on Campus program. They also provide incentive and information about the conflict. And most importantly, they do it through Palestinian Israelis. So the most important thing to remember is, if you want to get to the truth of things, always connect with Palestinians and Israelis on the ground, because they're the ones who's going to provide the most fruitful answers that you could acquire.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Alon, I saw you come off mute, but also Frankie has a hand up. So Frankie, did you want to add one thing and then we'll go to Alon?
Yes, I just want to let everyone know that as the speakers are talking, I've been sending the links in the group chat if you want to look back at any of these for future reference.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I don't know, I guess it's some thoughts, but I did wanted to say that I feel a bit uncomfortable with thinking about these, about our reality in the terms of narratives and peace building and bridging these gaps, because eventually what we're doing, the fight that we're trying to push in our society is politics, and politics is all about building power. Right now, we don't have the power to change our realities, because the ones that are holding the power control the way things are happening. They have the state, they have the media, they are telling the story, and you know, we are in the losing side. But that kind of drives us to what is our mission, and our mission is not to try and you know, bring people to talk together and learn about the other narrative and feeling good about having a neighbors that they can talk about. Our mission is very clear, and it's very, you know, focused, and it is to build power in our own society. If we will not be the ones that are getting engaged with our own society, talking about what are the interests of our own society, fighting for, you know, achieving those interests and showing our people that our government is not working for our interests, no one will do it for us. And what we will be left with is, you know, praying that someone will come from outside to save us from ourselves, like, you know, praying for Obama to come and save us from ourselves and force peace upon us, or praying for the UN. Those things will never happen. Look around the world, like who do we need to trust? Bolsonaro in Brazil, or Boris Johnson in UK, or Biden in the US, that showed us that they never, you know, do the right thing for Palestinians and Israelis. We need to build power. And building power is not talking about narratives, and it's not talking about, you know, peace building. If we are looking on what those things did across the years, is to raise generations of people, of young people, looking at peace talks and looking at Tzipi Livni going to meet President Abbas, and knowing that nothing comes out of it, but actually deteriorating realities. We, my generation, have no trust that those, you know, talks will bring something. We need to see how we bring a whole different approach. And just another thing, think of the question of who is the Israeli, probably Jewish Israeli, that wakes up in the morning and tells himself, today I want to meet a Palestinian to hear or her narrative. I will tell you, that's a privileged, old, living in the center of Israel, caring about other people's problem more than he cares about his own problem. And that's a problem, because if we want to build a majority and power in our society, we need to connect to the people that have daily problems, the problems that, you know, keeps them from being active in the struggle for peace or whatever. And I think that's the kind of the problem with all this, you know, peace building and this whole discourse. Fighting for peace is fighting for power, and it's building power in our own society, and that's doing politics. And for that, we need to talk about our own interests, our needs, and not about the other or why the narrative should shift or something. That is, a very wide layer of people that they care about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I so appreciate you bringing some of these points up, because that's also, I mean, it's good insight for us and our team as well, since, we're the ones hosting, but then as well, just for everyone to know, like, the one part that really stuck out to me was those daily struggles that get in the way of people being able to get involved in peace work and moving forward. And I think that's like where we really have to focus. So I see Wassim's hand. So here's what we'll do. We are coming towards the close of the panel discussion, and I will let Wassim answer. And then what I'll ask each of the panelists to do is give just a quick extra, if you will, about how you see your organization or the personal work that you're doing, working towards building that power of peace up in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So Wassim, we'll have you respond or ask the question, whichever one it is, and then go into that as well.
Thank you, and apologize in advance about my children screaming in the background.
No worries.
I want to make sure that we establish a few understanding before, like, when we talk about this peace building up, because I agree completely with what Alan said about creating grassroots movements. And I worked in a grassroots movement for 11 years. So I understand the importance of having a grassroots movement, not only having a grassroots movement, but also have a parallel leadership track to support that grassroots movement. It shouldn't be only bottom to top, but also top to bottom. But I think to move from that point into, I think it should exist, but also we should consider that once we have that peace, in order to keep that peace in place and in order to keep that peace sustainable, you need to build trust along the way. And if you jump from being a movement and a grassroots movement into politics and into creating a reality on the ground, you need to make sure that you sustain that reality. And if you cannot sustain that reality, then we're back to square one and there will be more violence. And obviously, this is when you need to create a two parallel track, one that works as a grassroots movement and the other one that works as a peace movement that builds trust between Palestinians and Israelis. And I've done work on both sides, and I have to say that it's incredible how difficult it is to find common threads of interest when it comes to this work. While some are motivated by equal rights and search for minority rights and being able to build being able to end the occupation and talk about the future of Palestinian Israelis, all I could think about on my side is, how am I going to inherit this conflict to my kids? Because I feel if I die tomorrow, I will inherit this conflict to my kids, and then I failed. And this is all I could think about. But being in a peace movement and living here is completely different from creating certain elements that says, let's put in perspective what we have and what we don't have, and if this is gonna work and if this is not gonna work. It's gonna work only when the people decide it's gonna work, when the majority of Palestinians and Israelis decide it's gonna work. And this is how I feel about the peace movement in general. I want to just finish up my things because you already asked the question. So thank you very much for hosting us today. Obviously, I feel I'm looking at right now at where we at the state as a movement, and I always keep saying, and I'm telling Huda, and this is Huda's important words to me, that we need to move from the culture of coexistence to a culture of co-resistance together as societies and being able to move the needle forward. I feel like in the last 3 months, what we really saw inside Israel, that this the culture of coexistence is a mirage. It did not exist. It only was a time before the glass was shattered, and then people saw Israelis and Palestinians beating each other on the streets. We cannot continue to live in this reality. I feel that in order for us to be able to move forward, we need to accept that there are some compromises that needs to be made. I used to believe in a two-state solution. I don't anymore, to be honest. And probably that would be the constitution of where people stand from one solution to another. I feel like the majority of people who support the two-state solution will continue to work on certain fronts and certain grassroots movements. I personally don't. I feel like it's too late to talk about this. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, continues to bring this up. We're in a very, very difficult time where we need to acknowledge that Palestinians who live here, they not only have to deal with the occupation, have to deal with the constant changes of the political, geopolitical map, but also they have to deal with an authority that actually constantly threatens them, beat them down, and make sure that they don't stand up and talk about these rights. Again, thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you, of course. Huda, will come to you. You're next on my screen.
Well, I stand with everything Wassim said, and also Alon. I think the power lies within the people themselves, but we need to give them that sense of power, and we need to work on our own societies first. And when we turn our backs to the other at this point, it's important to make sure that the challenges within our own community are immense. And when it comes to me personally, someone who worked all her life in order to see a Palestinian flag legitimately put at a school in Palestine, to know that I'm Palestinian, to know that I have an identity, a national anthem, everything, and to stand in early 90s with people who sent Israeli soldier with roses in Hebron, and to come to this reality. The only thing that comes to my mind is like, I cannot believe that I'm still fighting the same shit until now, which is something that the Americans did a few years ago during some administration ruling. I, as someone who's 51 years old, want what the young Palestinians and Israelis want, which is a sense of belonging to a place that can give them a sense of potential, to give them a place where they can grow to something that is not black and white, that is common to both of them, that speaks to their aspirations. I am committed to give them hope, which is a very, very difficult commodity now to get. But for us as Palestinians, I think one of the things that keeps us resilient is that we're not giving up on that hope, that one day the world will see us and will listen to us. And whether we believe it now or not, the Jews will be marching with us. And this is where it's going to happen. We will liberate ourselves, both. The Palestinians and the Israelis will work hard in order to liberate themselves. This is something that might not happen now when I'm living, but I want to work for it now. So for my 30 nieces and nephews to be able to reach their potential, to be able to see the sea. It's not human that the Palestinian kids cannot be by the sea. And this is something that you guys should know. This is a struggle that we go through every day. I had a conversation with my 5-year-old niece who started kindergarten, and she asked about the sea, and how can we go to the sea? And I didn't find the words to explain to her the whole permit system. She doesn't need a permit, but I need a permit to take her to the sea. And I saw my oldest niece, who the first time saw the sea, she just ran towards the sea and screamed her head off. And she didn't say a word. I think it's important to give the young Palestinians and Israelis a place to feel that they belong to, that they love, and they want to live in peace in. And one of the things that we can do first is to get rid of those so-called leaders.
Thank you for the words, Huda. We really appreciate it. And we'll move on to Elliot now for his closing remarks.
Sure. Well, I don't have quite the story that Huda shared, but thank you for sharing that. But Huda, Alon, Wassim, Arik, it's been great hearing from everybody, and thanks to the whole team for organizing. I think that staying within the social media misinformation, disinformation lane, I think the important thing to keep in mind is to watch out for those messages that are radicalizing on either direction and focus on reinforcing the messages that we're sharing here, that there are groups working together on the ground. It's the first thing I say when I see people posting about one side or the other. I'll just say, is this group working with both sides on the ground? You know, are you posting something where both groups are working together? Regardless of the agenda, regardless of what it says, it's the first question I ask. You can go on Snopes, you can go on Wikipedia, you can check the news. But if the people that are talking or the post that's being shared, whether it's an image, assuming that there's a source, always check your sources. You don't have to be an academic to check your sources, you know. But keep your eyes out for those, and I think it's great that, you know, people are talking about really amplifying those messages from the groups that are working on the ground, so that the people who are doing work there can continue to work. Very quickly, the profit model, I'm not going to go into a profit model thing, but it is more, you know, more makes more money, you know, so the idea is to be a consumer of the piece, you know, buy the products online that are promoting the piece, not the other side. Thank you guys for hosting.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. And Alon, I'll have you go ahead and give the final closing remarks. Unfortunately, Arik had to leave us early.
So I don't have anything as emotional and beautiful like Huda said, but I will say that there is a truth, and we can know what is the truth. And it's not about, you know, he's saying that and she's saying that. We can always try and understand, like in the vaccination discussion that we have right now, not every opinion matters the same. And we can know that even if people think that we are benefiting from the occupation as Israelis, we are losing from it. Even if people thinking that the Palestinians are responsible for their own occupation, they're wrong. And the truth is that the majority of people in our region have only what to benefit from ending the occupation and achieving a peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and between Jews and Arabs. And with this, you know, with this security of you know, and self-security of knowing we need to come to our own societies and do the work of building movements of self-interest and building stories of self-interest. And, you know, Huda said so, and it related to something, sorry to bring him up, Karl Marx wrote, but he said, humankind will liberate itself or it will not be liberated at all. And that's upon us. And we are the agents of change in our own societies. And I think for too long, we've been dependent on people from the outside, or in people that will come and, you know, and do the work for us, or our leaders. But it's as we see now in the West Bank, people are trying to rise up and to do the work themselves. And people in Israel in the past month, in thousands of them, went out, Jews and Arabs, to try and create a different reality. And that's the seed of what is possible in our region.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wow, just so many amazing, beautiful ideas and stories were shared, as well as just great information. And we just want to say thank you again from the Amplify Unity team for being here with us today and giving us all of your insights on the work that you and your organizations are doing on the ground. We are now going to turn to the second half of our discussion today, where we'll be putting the participants